Boy, do I have a story to tell you. As much as I wish I could tell you that this video was clickbait, it's not. I actually suffered a catastrophic engine failure, the kind that leaves pretty much everything inside the engine completely destroyed. And it happened in the most reliable M3 ever made. Whatever, I'm just gonna do a donut. The US E36 M3, not to mention when it only had 80,000 miles. This failure is rare, and it typically only happens on higher mileage engines or ones that have seen quite a bit of modification. And in a way, it was actually my fault. It's something I did. And it's something a lot of you might be doing too, and it's completely preventable. So if you own, or you are looking to own, any E-Series BMW like the E36, E46, E53, E39, or anything else that had that same series of engines, you should probably know about this. I had just gotten back from spending my Saturday the way that many of you guys do who own cars like this, having a good time driving it. I live in the mountains, lucky for me, so I was out cruising some canyons, taking this sucker to redline, enjoying the engine noises bouncing off the cliffs. Oh, can you hear that? And when I got back, it was time to do some maintenance. So I had just changed the fluid in my rear diff, lowered the car, started it up, and went for a drive. Now I know this car pretty well. I'm used to the lights that are supposed to be showing on the dash, like this one after I deleted the ASC. But I only made it a couple houses down and another light illuminated on the dash that caught my eye. And I was a little puzzled for a minute, like, what? Low oil pressure? That doesn't make sense. And I have an oil pressure gauge, so then I looked down to verify that it did indeed not have oil pressure, and the gauge was reading 0. So I hurried and turned off the car as fast as I could. Now all of this went down in a matter of maybe 2 or 3 seconds. You guys know how fast your brain can work when things crazy are going on. My mind's going a million miles an hour. I'm trying to think to myself how I can figure out if I actually damaged the engine or not, because as I told you, I had been out driving this car very hard for a long time earlier in the day. Did I have low oil pressure during that whole time, or did I just lose it right now? I needed to know. So I called my wife, had her walk a couple houses down the street, help me push this thing back in the garage, and the whole time my neighbors are looking at me like, hey, it's a BMW, of course that happened to him. It's about time. And the first thing I do when I get this car back in the garage is jack it up, take a look at the oil filter, and drain the oil. When you lose oil pressure, typically the first thing to go are going to be your rod bearings, and those leave a mess in the oil. Luckily, when I looked at the fins in my oil filter, they looked clean, nothing was alarming there. After draining the oil, I looked at it, it didn't look too glittery, nothing was alarming there either. 2 major wins. But that doesn't mean that I was in the clear. I actually took some of the oil as a sample and sent it out to Blackstone so they could tell me if there were high metals in the oil. And until that test came back, the car had to sit here doing absolutely nothing. And it took about a month. You can imagine when I got that email, I was pretty excited to read it, a little nervous at the same time. I can't recommend Blackstone enough. When you send them an oil sample, you can actually ask them questions and tell them things you're looking for. And here's what they said. Gavin, you asked about bearing wear, so we'll start here. In the S52s, high lead is the first sign of a bearing problem. Lead read just 1 ppm, a smidgen below what averages show as typical. Whew. I think at this point, after reading that email from Blackstone Labs, it was pretty safe to say that I dodged a major bullet with this one. So what actually happened to make me completely lose oil pressure? How did I deal with it? And how can you prevent this from ever happening to you? Because most of the time when it does happen, you end up with rod knock or a hole in the block. As far as what I did about it, I went shopping, of course. This is the perfect opportunity for me to not only buy what I need, but to find an excuse to get stuff that I maybe didn't need. You know, sort of like, I need to buy this turbo because it's time to change my air filter sort of thing. So I picked up an upgraded oil pump kit. I also picked up a reinforced oil pickup tube. I think these are from a Z3. They can sometimes crack right at the end of the pickup. These ones are reinforced, so they shouldn't do that. And then I also picked up an oil pan baffle because I need it, don't I? In case you didn't figure it out by the parts you just looked at, I suffered an oil pump failure. What happened to me was the nut backed off, fell into the oil pan, which made the sprocket come off, which means that the oil pump wasn't being turned anymore, creating oil pressure. There is another way that that failure can happen with the shaft of the oil pump having so much vibration that it actually ends up just shearing off. With the parts that I got, both of those problems were solved. But why does this happen in the first place, and do you need to worry about it? The answer is, Well, maybe you do. Typically, you only see this on cars that are heavily used on track, have extremely high miles, or number 3, which is what I had, it was pretty much solid motor mounts that create a lot of extra vibration that the factory didn't plan for. I'm not going to say what company I originally bought my motor mounts from. They're not on the car anymore. They were marketed as polyurethane when essentially they just were solid aluminum with polyurethane around them that didn't even need to be there in the first place to function. When I put them on, I thought the engine was vibrating quite a lot for having just poly engine mounts, and I figured out why. Now it has true polyurethane engine mounts on them, and there's way less vibration. But again, I don't have to worry about that anymore because of the parts that I bought. So, with everything now installed in the car, we are just about ready to rip, but not quite yet. I don't think it's the best idea ever to just go ahead and start driving as hard as I can without double checking that what we did actually fixed the problem I had. So check it out. I hooked up a manual oil pressure gauge to the engine and double checked the oil pressure. You can see at idle we're 14 PSI. The oil light will come on at 7, so we've got about double what we need for idle. Once we get the RPMs up, we are plenty good with oil pressure. Let's see what happens when we rev it. Well, it means that not only do we get luckier than 90% of the people this happens to, but we can also get back to doing things like this. There's a stoplight right there. So, I hope you missed me. And I sure hope you missed the E36, because we're back, baby.